Hi, the name of this Blender video is UVTexturesPart3 Seams. Sometimes unwrapping a mesh using Blender's selection of unwrapping projections will not provide a satisfactory result. This is especially true when the object is complex or organic in shape. In these cases, it becomes necessary to unwrap the mesh based on seams. To demonstrate UV seam unwrapping, I've modeled a frog object in my Blender scene. The frog model consists of three objects: the frog object, the left eye object, and the right eye object. This frog object was modeled primarily by extruding elements of a subdivided and subsurfaced cube. The frog object also has a mirror modifier. If I tab into Edit mode, you can see the left side of the frog object is modeled, and the mirror modifier creates the right side of the frog. Seam unwrapping allows the modeler some control over how a mesh is unwrapped into a flat surface. This is accomplished by selecting certain mesh edges and marking them as seams. When unwrapped, Blender uses these seams as cutting lines around which the mesh is unwrapped. One way to visualize this is to think of the mesh as a three-dimensional model comprised of paper faces. Which edges of the paper model should be cut to best allow the mesh to unwrap into a flat surface. Each mesh will have its own unique problems, and this frog mesh poses a number of unwrapping problems. The largest problem is that the frog was modeled with the legs bending back on themselves. This mesh would be considerably easier to unwrap if the legs had been modeled extending straight out of the XY plane, then posed into this bended position using a Blender rigged armature. Nevertheless, I'll try to unwrap this mesh as best as possible to provide as smooth a transition of texture from one part of the mesh to another part of the mesh as possible. I'll begin by splitting my 3D viewport into two windows. In the left window, I'll display the UV image editor. With the frog object selected, and in Edit mode, I'll select all of the faces. In the UV image editor, I'll press the Image button, and then press Open Image. And I'll select the frogskin2.jpg image file located in my UV Part 3 folder. Then click Open Image. In the 3D editor, with the frog mesh faces selected, I'll press the U key and select Unwrap. I'll then go to Texture Display mode. As you can see, the default unwrap does not provide a good result. I'll try the cylinder projection. I'll try the sphere projection. I'll try the cube projection. Our best chance of using a UV texture in this object is to create seams to control the unwrapping of the mesh. I'll select Reset in the UV mapping. I'll then go to Solid Shading mode. I think the best approach to this seam unwrap is to separate the leg faces from the body faces so that they can be unwrapped and adjusted on their own. To save time, I've already created 3 vertex groups in the Object Data Editor and assigned the faces of the frog object to their appropriate groups. First, the front leg group, then the back leg group, then the frog body group. I'll start with the frog body group of faces. I'll deselect the group. And I'll select the series of edges that run along the length of the frog body. This line of edges intersects with the top of the back and front leg top edges. In the front of the frog body, I'll continue selecting edges up the mouth area and into the eye cavity. I'll then press Ctrl E, which is the Edge Select menu, and select Mark Seams. This sets the selected edges as marked seams upon which the unwrap function will operate. Note that the seam edges are identified in red. In the Vertex Group panel, I'll select all of the frog body faces. I'll then press the U key and select Unwrap. The frog body faces are now unwrapped in the UV editor based on the cutting along the marked seams. I'll click on the Pin button to the right of the Frog Skin 2 JPEG image title. This will cause the image file to remain displayed no matter how many times the mesh is unwrapped. I'll go to Texture Display Mode. In the UV editor, I'll select all of the UVs and scale them up a bit. This is not perfect, but it's not bad either. I'll deselect the faces and go to Solid Shading Mode. I'll select all of the edges in the back of the front leg of the frog. I'll then press Ctrl E and mark the seams. In the Vertex Group panel, I'll select the front leg group of faces. I'll then press the U key and unwrap. I'll then go to Texture Display Mode. I'll select all of the UVs and scale them down a bit. I'll also move the island of UVs off the image itself. I'll unselect the faces in the 3D viewport and go to Solid Shading Mode. Now I'll select all of the edges on the back leg of the frog down around the perimeter of the foot. I'll then press Ctrl E and mark the selected edges as a seam. I'll deselect the edges, and then in the Vertex Group panel, select the back leg faces. I'll then press the U key and unwrap. The back leg mesh faces are unwrapped in the UV editor based on the cutting of the marked seams. I'll go to Texture Display Mode. I'll select all of the UVs and scale them up a bit. And then I'll move them off the image. In the Vertex Group panel, I'll add the front leg and frog body faces to the selection. Now all of the frog object UVs are displayed in the UV editor. In the UV editor, I'll switch to Island Select Mode. I'll then deselect the UVs. I can now select the islands individually. I'll select the frog body UVs and move it to the center of the image. I'll then select all of the UVs, click the UV button in the bottom menu, and select Average Islands Scale. This will average out the scale of the 3 island groups. I'll select the front leg UVs and move them to the right and rotate them a bit. I'm positioning the unwrapped front leg mesh in the approximate position it would be in relationship to the frog body mesh. I'll then select the back leg UVs and move them down a bit and rotate them a bit. I'm positioning the unwrapped back leg mesh in the approximate position it would be in relationship to the front body mesh. This UV mapping is by no means perfect, but it's not too bad. I'll click on the Image button in the bottom menu of the UV editor and select Replace Image. I'll select the Frog Skin 3 JPEG image from my UVPart3 folder and click on Replace Image. I'll click on the Image button in the bottom menu of the UV editor and select Replace Image. And I'll select the Frog Skin 4 image from my UVPart3 folder and click on Replace Image. This might be a good choice of images for this mesh, as the inconsistencies are not too obvious. I'll click on the Image button in the bottom menu of the UV editor and select Replace Image. I'll select the Frog Skin 1 JPEG image from my UVPart3 folder and click on Replace Image. Despite some minor inconsistencies, I think this image is best. I'll deselect the faces in the 3D viewport and tab out of Edit mode. I'll then select the left eye object and tab into Edit mode. In the UV editor, I'll click on the Image button, then Open Image. And I'll open the Frog Eye JPEG image located in my UVPart3 folder. In the 3D viewport, with faces selected, I'll press the U key and unwrap. I'll select the UVs, rotate them, and scale them up a bit, and move them a bit. The frog left eye is now UV mapped. I'll deselect the faces and tab out of Edit mode. I'll then select the right eye object and tab into Edit mode. With the faces selected, I'll press the U key and unwrap. I'll again open the frog eye image in the UV image editor. I'll then adjust the UVs to position them as I did with the left eye object. The frog is now UV image mapped. I'll deselect the faces and tab out of Edit mode. And I'll close the UV image editor window. I'll select the left eye object, go to the Material Editor, and add a new material. I'll call this material Eye. In the Options panel of the Material Editor, I'll checkmark Face Textures. I'll then select the right eye object and go to the Material Editor, and I'll click on the Browse Material button and select the existing material named Eye. I'll then render the scene. The two eye objects are rendered with their UV texture mappings using the fast and easy rendering method covered in the previous video tutorial. I'll use a more detailed method of rendering the frog body and legs UV map texture. I'll select the frog object and go to the Materials Editor, and add a new material. I'll name this material Frog. I'll set the specular slider to 0. I'll then go to the texture editor and create a new texture named Skin. Under Type, I'll select Image or Movie. In the Image panel, I'll click on the Open button and select the Frog Skin 1 JPEG image located in my UVPart3 folder. In the Mapping panel, under Coordinates, I'll select UV. I'll then render the scene. The frog is now rendered using the UV mapping coordinates based on the seam-marked unwrapping. I'll add another texture channel, and I'll name it Frog Bump. Under Type, I'll select Image or Movie. I'll click on the Open button in the Image panel and select the Frog Skin Bump JPEG image located in my UVPart3 folder. In the Mapping panel, under Coordinates, I'll select UV. In the Influence panel, I'll uncheck Color and check Normal. I'll then set the Normal slider to 0.3. I'll then render the scene.